So if you're interested in the neuroscience of 5-MeO-DMT, ask me or find me after the talk in the after party. I'm happy to answer, but this talk is mostly going to be about botany and zoology and a bit of ethnobotany and history. So I'll continue. As Pascal said, I'm a board member of Chacruna Institute. I'm also a consultant research scientist for Berkeley SciTech, but this work has nothing to do with my work at Berkeley SciTech. Here I'm speaking on my own behalf and present my own research. So I'll start introducing what is 5-MeO-DMT. It's a short-acting psychedelic tryptamine. Don't confuse it with the N-DMT that Javier was talking about in the previous talk. 5-MeO-DMT has different chemical structure, different binding potential, and very different subjective effects. And it's currently also in clinical development for all sorts of mental health issues, notably treatment-resistant depression and substance use disorder. But again, this is a subject of a different talk. Also, this year might be one of the last years where you see 5-MeO-DMT in titles of the talks, because the name of the compound has officially been changed to mebufotenin. And this is part of the WHO standardizing generic naming convention for pharmaceutical products. But we don't know what company triggered this renaming. But yeah, it's now going to be called mebufotenin. The history of 5-MeO discovery, it was first synthesized in 1936, subsequently isolated from various plants. First one in 1959. Later on, it's been... Why does it keep changing by itself? Later been identified in several snuffs from South America, and subsequently found in very small quantities in a huge number of plants. There are at least 60 that I know of, and I'm not going to mention all of them by name, but we'll look at the main ones. And in 1967, it was discovered in gland secretions of Instillus alvarius toad. 5-MeO is found in animals, in amphibians, the aforementioned toad, but also in mammals. There have been 2 studies in one study in rodents and several studies in humans. And again, Javier has done brilliant introduction about the search for schizotoxin, a substance that was supposedly causing schizophrenia, and 5-MeO-DMT has been investigated together with DMT and bufotenin as a potential candidate for this. So a lot of research on endogenous 5-MeO-DMT in humans has been done in the 60s and 70s. And if anyone wants to take up the study now with modern methods, this is a gaping hole in research. So there is a lot to be found to understand what are physiological roles, where it is produced, when it is produced, and why. So just as Javier was saying about DMT, it applies to 5-MeO-DMT. And in those early studies, it's been detected inconsistently, and there was no difference between patients or controls, but it has been found in urine, cerebrospinal fluid, and blood. And what we do know, though, it's found in very large quantities in this one amphibian, Sonoran desert toad. It's native to Sonoran Desert, and you can see it in yellow on the map. The toad is mostly found in 2 states in the United States, Arizona and New Mexico, and in large territory in Mexico. It's the largest native toad in the United States, and it's a very interesting amphibian because they live for most of the year in the underground burrows in the state of akin to hibernation, and only come out in autumn with the start of the rainy season, when they all come out from the burrows, gather around ponds or pools of water, and start reproducing. And these toads are, you can see on the photograph, glands. Oh, I don't have laser pointer, but there are very prominent glands behind toad's eyes and also on its legs. And these glands produce toxin, which is very commonly called venom, but technically speaking, it's not venom because it's not injected with a bite or a spine in any way. So it's gland secretions, and toads produce them as protection from predators. So if anyone tries to eat the toad, they get not a very nice experience, and there were reports of dogs that were very sick, and some died after eating the toads. And so generally speaking, there is, in these gland secretions, there are lots of toxins, particularly cardioglycosides, and all sorts of other things, in addition to 5-MeO-DMT and bufotenin. And 5-MeO-DMT content can be as high as 45% of this gland secretions. But the exact quantity varies between the toads, between their living conditions, time of the year, and we don't even know if toads produce it at all in winter, because there have been some studies that look at raccoons or various animals, carrying them around when they excavated them from the burrows. And raccoons also learned to eat the toads despite the glands. They turned to flip them around and eat them from the bellies. But what I wanted to say is about milking the toads. So toad secretions are for human consumption, are extracted by milking the toads, which is a very stressful event. And although many people claim that taking the gland secretions from the toad does not harm them, it all depends on how it's done, and also depends on the economies of scale. So what happens in practice, and here are some pictures that I found on in the social media of the quantities that are extracted and sold, and often sold to various retreats that exist in Mexico and all over the world, is that it's now being extracted in huge quantities, and nobody knows exactly the extent of this trade, the extent of demand, the extent of supply, because it's very hard to study, and a lot of it is governed by black market dynamics. But generally what happens is, in Mexico, people drive along the roads where toads are very easy to spot because they're attracted by lights that attracts the insects, and toads hang by the road. And they collect lots of toads along the road, drive them somewhere, express all the glands, and then just dump the toads all together. And it's a very stressful event. It mixes different populations of toads. Toads are not returned to their habitat, where their known territory, where they know the land, and generally it can be fatal for the toads. Also, handling toads can spread pathogens, and already there is a huge pandemic that's devastating amphibian populations worldwide. And this is a pandemic that's not often talked about, unlike our human pandemics. But there is a chytrid fungus that's spread all over the world, and many amphibian species have either become completely extinct or are seriously affected by it. And already in Arizona, there was one study about Sonoran desert toad tested positive for this fungus. And the biggest issue with the toads as well is that we don't know the extent of their populations. The latest International Union for Conservation of Nature status lists them as least concern, but it's been updated in 2004, and since then there have been no studies on toad demographics, on their populations and the change in the populations, and understanding how extracting the toad secretions and also other anthropogenic factors and climate change affect toad populations. So it's a huge unknown. What can you do to help? First of all, I would encourage everyone to use synthetic 5-MeO-DMT rather than toad secretions, and also support conservation in the Sonoran Desert and spread the word about this. And the last slide about the toad, I wanted to talk a bit about the history of toad use and the rumors that circulate that the use of toad secretions is an ancient practice. As far as we know, there is no literary, archaeological, or ethnographic evidence for the traditional use of toad secretions. And this practice started with the publication of this booklet in the 1980s, and Hamilton, in his TV series, made investigation into who is the author and talks a lot about this issue as well. However, in the 21st century, some indigenous groups in Mexico started developing ceremonial toad use, so you can witness new traditions in the making. 5-MeO has been found so far in two fungi, these two guys, Amanita porphyria and Amanita citrina, or false death cap. However, the quantity it's been found in has been very, very tiny, and I do not recommend also picking those mushrooms to look for 5-MeO because it looks very similar to to death cap, which is lethal mushroom. And in terms of 5-MeO-DMT in plants, these three genera are probably most famous in association with 5-MeO-DMT. First one is the Anadenanthera, which has 2 species. And the use of Anadenanthera in particular, what a word, and it doesn't even have a name in English, has a very, very long history of use. Unlike mushrooms or even ayahuasca, this one has very well documented excellent archaeological evidence going back 4,500 years ago in South America. And for example, this one of the stelas from Chavin de Huantar, which is a very interesting culture from South America. They also use San Pedro. And if you're interested to learn more about archaeology, I highly recommend this book by Constantino Manuel Torres. The earliest archaeological evidence is from Puna, Argentina, and from Atacama Desert in Chile. And they find snuff trays and pipes with the remains of the seeds from Anadenanthera plants. And slightly later in time, about 1,500 years ago, other Andean cultures added these seeds from these plants to beer, producing mildly psychedelic effects compared to snuffs. The snuffs from Anadenanthera are still used amongst different indigenous peoples in the Amazon. And the snuffs are from Anadenanthera colubrina are called Vilca or Sibyl and have various other names depending on the place. And Vilca in Quechua means sacred. Also, in addition to entheogenic uses, the tree bark has a lot of medicinal uses and also harvested for wood and tannin. Anadenanthera peregrinis snuffs are called Yopo or Cohobo parica. And I'm getting lost with the jumping slides. One of the earliest European documented uses come from 1496 by Taino of Hispaniola. And their preparations are made from the seeds of the seed pods of those trees. And snuffs are sometimes used together with Banisteriopsis capi. So it's kind of interesting hybrids. It's not quite ayahuasca, but sometimes it's used together. And they're also used as enemas, not just snuffs. So in summary, snuffs made from seeds and sometimes bark have been used across most of South America for thousands of years. And there are conflicting reports on 5-MeO-DMT quantity and presence in these trees. Some studies find it, some not. But most studies find bufotenin as the main alkaloid. Virola is another genus of plants that have 5-MeO-DMT. And there are many species of Virola that have confirmed presence of 5-MeO. Again, these trees are native to the Amazon basin, and again, they're used as snuffs. And snuffs are made from the red sap, kind of red resin you can see at the bottom of the picture. And there are a variety of uses how these snuffs are used. Some indigenous people even give these preparations to hunting dogs to improve their hunting ability. They also use to immobilize prey, and also have other medicinal uses. And again, some indigenous people use it together with Banisteriopsis capi. Yanomami people are interesting because they use both Virola trees and Anadenanthera trees to produce psychoactive snuffs. And throughout the days, they use high quantities of snuffs to commune with spirits, and they again use it as dart poisons and to immobilize animals. And a very interesting book by Daviko Pinava, which describes the practices of using the snuffs as well as ayahuasca use, but most importantly, the struggle for their land and life in modern-day Brazil, and how it is difficult to work with all the forces that work on deforestation and struggle for the lands and other things. So in summary, Virolas are much more promising as a source of 5-MeO-DMT, particularly bark resin of Virola elongata. And if you want to know more the numbers and references, talk to me later. I have it all in additional slides. Our next genus is Phalaris. It has 15 to 22 species, but 2 are known for its tryptamine content. One of the species is Phalaris aquatica, or canary grass. It's a common grass native to Mediterranean, but it's now introduced as crops all over the world. It's a very quick-growing grass, and so is the reed canary grass. Again, it's been used as forage mainly for cows and sheep, and these grasses have sometimes have high quantities of DMT and 5-MeO-DMT, and also other alkaloids in them. And they, because of that, and because that they're very commonly used as forage, but sometimes when cattle grazes on these grasses, they develop something called staggers, which is a neurological condition that can be fatal to animals. And very often DMT and 5-MeO-DMT, but also things like Gramine were blamed for it, and that led to a lot of research into figuring out DMT and 5-MeO-DMT content and breeding of lots of varieties that do not have DMT in it, but they still haven't fully confirmed that it's actually tryptamines that cause staggers. And here are some of the studies that show 5-MeO-DMT and Gramine content and how it varies over the seasons, and it's hugely variable. So in summary, the alkaloid content varies greatly between Phalaris species. There are some cultivars that have predominantly 5-MeO-DMTs. for example, strains like Turkey Red. And again, on the forums and in underground use, there are people who breed those grasses and claim that they extract 5-MeO from them, and it works greatly. This is an interesting plant that is often cited as the one that contains 5-MeO DMT, but it's actually was based on a mistaken identification of this plant. And this plant actually contains just DMT, and it's a very common admixture for ayahuasca plants with Banisteriopsis caapi. And 5-MeO is absent in it, as far as we know. And now I'm coming to a list of lots of other plants. However, that a lot of assays that have been done to identify the presence of 5-MeO DMT in them have been done more than 20 years ago, and they've been done by enthusiasts. It hasn't been part of research, hasn't been done in laboratories, so it was more of a citizen science effort. And a lot of this is done by Trout and described in some simple tryptamine's book, and also Garden of Eden by Snow, which is an excellent ethnobotanical source. Acacias are another group of plants that have some of them have a lot of DMT, but some of them also have 5-MeO DMT. And particularly in Australia, acacias are one of the main source of DMTs. And to some extent, that some of the species have been over-harvested, and there are some concerns about certain acacias being stripped of its bark for DMT. So there is even a conservation guide about being mindful of what acacias to harvest and how. Another genus of plants that has been tentatively found to contain 5-MeO DMT are a group of succulents native to South Africa. This is one example, but there are about 10 other plants. And it's used in preparation of kadi, an alcoholic beverage. Again, the 5-MeO DMT content varies between the seasons, and another plant is mimosa, and there are 2 other mimosa species which have 5-MeO DMT identified. This one is quite an interesting mimosa. It's a sensitive plant, or touch me not, and if you touch it, its leaves fold like this. And it's been used as a model organism to study plant memory, circadian rhythms, and it's one of the rare examples of plants that react very fast to environment. And this long table, you just look at the rightmost column, where you see the list of plants and these many plants that have tentatively identified 5-MeO DMT in them. And I don't have time to go through all of them. But I want to mention this plant, Phyllodeum pulchellum. It's widespread in Asia and Australia, and it's a very important plant in Ayurvedic and traditional Chinese medicine. Its decoction of its bark is used for treating many illnesses, and it has one of the highest amounts of 5-MeO DMT amongst plants, and it also has its own beta-carbolines. Which is interesting. And again, there are anecdotal reports of bioassays of these plants being psychoactive. Another plant that has 5-MeO DMT is Pilocarpus, or it's a genus of about 13 species of plants, and it's notable for the source of pilocarpine, which is a drug used to treat glaucoma and other illnesses, which is also quite toxic. And apparently there is one species in this genus that does not contain pilocarpine and has relatively high percent of 5-MeO DMT. But again, this is unverified. So to summarize, promising 5-MeO-containing plants are Anadenanthera peregrina, Desmodium pulchellum, Virola, and some of the strains of Phalaris. But we need to do a lot more systematic assays of the species listed and other related ones, and do proper laboratory studies to confirm the presence of 5-MeO-DMT and also conditions under which it is present. And I want to say that essentially hardly anyone gets 5-MeO-DMT from plants. Most people who want natural 5-MeO-DMT get it from the toads, and also synthetic 5-MeO-DMT is used, and this is what synthetic is used in clinical research. And highest 5-MeO-DMT content is in resin of Virola elongata bark, certain Phalaris cultivars. And also we need to work on extraction techniques, how to extract just 5-MeO-DMT and not DMT or together with bufotenin, because they very often co-occur. And also think about conservation implications, particularly for toads. And thank you very much.